Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next workshop we have on a really important conversation right now. Transit agencies across the country have been stepping up to ensure vital service while taking safety precautions for operators and riders alike since the outbreak in March. We are now 26 weeks into this pandemic, and today we have a panel discussion to provide the opportunity to hear from both the urban and the rural provider perspectives on protocols and measures that have been instituted during the pandemic and ways those have impacted not only their operators but riders in these communities. I'd like to welcome our panelists today. We have Taulby Roach, the CEO and President of Bi-State Development. Taulby, thanks for taking it for the team and doing back-to-back workshops. We really appreciate that. We have Jameson Auten, Deputy CEO and COO of Kansas City Area Transportation Authority. Jameson has been warned to be on his best behavior during this panel. So Jameson, thank you for joining us. And we also have Scott Bogren, the Executive Director of CTAA. And Scott, welcome back. Scott is going to be providing the rural transit perspective on this panel. So we're going to begin with some questions that we have developed for our panel, and then we're going to give the audience a chance to weigh in by asking questions through the chat box, which we'll then read to make sure that everyone is aware those questions have been submitted. If you aren't speaking, we ask you to mute yourself just to make sure that we eliminate any background noise for that. So MPTA, the Missouri Public Transit Association, has been meeting regularly over the last 6+ months with Missouri transit providers to share protocols and lessons learned. A common theme is that no agency had ever planned for an event quite like what we're dealing with right now in our communities. So to begin, I'd like to ask each one of you to provide us a little bit of background about your agency or organization and the moment you realized how significant the implications were going to be to transit from this global pandemic. So why don't we start with Jameson today?
Sure. Good morning, and thanks for having us here, Kim. And yes, good behavior will be had today. So in Kansas City, we at the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, we've been in business here since 1965. We're a bi-state authority, so we operate in Missouri and in Kansas, 3 counties in Kansas, 4 counties in Missouri. When we first really got hit over the head with what we were going to be dealing with, it was probably early March. We had some other actions that were going on in the organization, and then this whole coronavirus thing was happening. And initially the guidance was you don't need masks, right? Masks are if you're sick. So we started to follow that, and then we realized that wow, we probably should have just got the masks. So it was mid-March. We did quite a few things to try to turn on the dime as best that we could. Operator safety was paramount for us. Those are the folks who are touching the public the most. But also our folks who are coming in on campus. We wanted to make sure that we were nimble enough to get folks off of campus. We were able to do that fairly quickly. But yeah, it was really mid-March when that was the time when our eyes fully opened and we realized that we had some pretty big levers to pull on to make sure that we were going to be able to migrate through this pandemic.
Thank you. Taulby or Scott, would you like to jump in?
Sure, I'll be happy to start. So when will I know what the full impact of COVID is? I don't know. I wish one of my wise panelists could tell me, because I think like everybody, we're wading through essentially the fog. And it is just very difficult and has been very difficult day to day. And it is true, as Jameson pointed out, even our federal partners have kind of changed their tune on how to deal with this, because gosh, has anybody else dealt with this? So I guess really what we're trying to do is turn into the real value of us as an organization. And really that's the people who run the organization, and be sure to protect those people and talk to them about what works best. And what works best right now for us is that you take every measure that you can. If there's a measure that you can take to make a difference, whether that's the reality or emotionally and being a frontline employee, then by golly, you do it. And so that's what we've been trying to do every single measure that we can and continue to measure what are the effects of COVID so that then we can professionally respond.
Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
Kim,
And Scott?
Yeah, we kind of looked at this as everyone did in mid-March and started to recognize what we were facing. And I sent a message to our members in early April where I was trying to figure out, like, from a strategic perspective, what are we looking at here? And we felt like March, April, May, and even probably through June, it was largely triage on the part of all systems, just trying to figure out, deal with the sometimes widely changing federal guidance. But it was massive losses of ridership across the country, this move to essential only for services, this odd kind of federal mandate that was pushed that you've got to keep running transit, but oh, by the way, we're a little bit slow on getting you all the PPE and the equipment you need to do it safely. That was that kind of period. The second phase is the one we're in now, which is we've triaged, we're starting to see ridership return, and we're wondering, what does this phrase new normal look like? And absent a vaccine and some of the, I think, better treatment protocols that are emerging on the virus, this is this holding pattern we're in now, where I've been trying to tell our members, don't make decisions, long-term decisions necessarily right now based on what you're doing now. After the vaccine arrives, God help us that it's successful, we can start, then the new normal really arrives. And that's going to be in that first quarter of ideally 2021. And we're going to start to get a sense of what Taulby was saying, what are the long-term economic impacts? We're too close to it now to know.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for laying out the background for everyone. So I'm going to start with you, though, on this one, Scott, before you take a drink. Out the gate, since you're representing the rural transit agencies, what did you see were the three biggest challenges that they encountered with the arrival of this pandemic? You said phase one was triage. Well, what were those top three challenges during the triage phase, and how were those challenges either overcome or not overcome that you saw from the rural perspective? And then I'm going to pitch that question to both Jameson and Taulby for them to kind of let us know what their three challenges were and what they saw.
I'm going to underscore what Taulby raised. First off, safety. The first thing we heard from rural operators across the country was, hey, I've got a large percentage of my drivers who are 60 plus and therefore are vulnerable right from the get-go. So we took that into account. We started to talk with Congress about the CARES Act, and we were trying to play that along two fronts for rural operators. Maximize the funding, but at the same time, get that 100% federal share. Because we understood from the beginning that if we brought $3-4 billion of additional funds into 5311, which was discussed, and they wanted a 50-50 match on that for operating, that was going to be, dead on arrival and would be bad. So those two, and then we saw immediately something that, rural systems are so good at. They immediately transferred to, okay, meal delivery. How do we do some of the things that we've tended to take people to? How do we bring it to them and allow them to safely stay at home? And so those were the big pieces, I think, Kim, we were kind of focused on right at the get-go.
Okay, great. And is there one of them that stands out besides the CARES Act funding, which we would consider very successful in Missouri? Of those other two, outcome-wise, were they overcome or not overcome, or what is still a lingering big challenge for rural providers?
Okay, a lot of rural providers were at the very end of the food chain on getting masks, getting proper PPE. Now they're very creative. And I was right away seeing all of these ways that they were modifying their vehicles. I mean, I have never seen shower curtains and duct tape used.
I was just going to say that.
So amazingly right away. And I mean, that's testament to the way rural systems operate. But I hated to see that too, because, you know, we need to do this stuff right. Safety is at risk. And then, you know, there was a general feeling in rural America that this was only going to happen in the big cities, and that this would be, well, it's all happening in New York City right now. And we kind of took the approach that it's starting there, but inevitably it's going to end up everywhere. So I was sometimes a little disconcerted when I'd hear conversations with rural states and rural operators, and they say, well, there's nothing here, so we're just operating business as usual. And I kind of would say, hey, be grateful you're getting a little bit of chance to prep. And a lot of systems didn't get that and use it effectively.
Thank you. So Jameson and Taulby, same question. What were the three biggest challenges out the gate? And do you think that KCATA and bi-state development, did you overcome them? Are you still dealing with them? What is it looking like now?
So I'll go ahead. So the three challenges for us, in my opinion, the first one was behavior change. How do we adapt our behavior to protect ourselves during this pandemic? And that has a real safety consequence associated with it. So we were able to find creative ways to get masks early on. I know Goodwill, Missouri, Western Missouri, Kansas, repositioned themselves into a mask producing factory. So we're able to get masks from them pretty early into the game. We're able to coordinate with some of the distilleries to get hand sanitizer when that was hard to find. Fortunately, we had 100% of our fleet has bus barriers. So those were used. They've been used for about 2 years, but they were really, really used. We didn't have to check on that. And then we also suspended fares on the entire system and went to rear boarding. But on campus, you know, with some of our maintenance folks and some of our office folks, making sure that masks were being worn in common areas, making sure social distancing and hand washing. So it was really these things that we hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to, right, until this pandemic started. That was a challenge in that overall behavior change. Secondly, there's a commitment to the community that, you know, we're going to do no harm, right? We're going to try to help people get where they need to be. We connect people with opportunities, as all transit agencies do. So we needed to make sure that we were inspiring confidence in the system itself. So cleaning the buses, disinfecting the buses daily, making sure the public knew that, internal and external robust communication strategy to help on that. And then finally, continuity of business itself. So we have about 75% of our admin staff working remotely. That's something that we hadn't done before. Our IT department was able to mobilize rather quickly, get folks what they need. Again, communication on how they were doing, what did they need that we didn't have. We're able to get them those things. And we're about to close on a RFP for a consultant for a permanent remote work strategy that implements best practices. Glad to report that each of those areas we're doing extremely well. Of our 751 employees, we've had, I believe, six positive confirmed cases at this point. So we're doing well, but those are the challenges that we saw early on, but happy to say we think we're in a good spot as long as we continue to be diligent.
Thank you, Jameson. Taulby?
Well, the challenges have been significant. There's no question. But right off the bat, even in some of the challenges, I think help signal to the system and to the community what is our value. So I'll use as a very quick example. So very early in the pandemic, we were paring back service, and everybody was chasing their tail, including us, figuring out what we're going to do. And as a matter of fact, in our businesses, I think most people, some businesses moved down and worked less. We, at least those who were not affected through quarantine or so on, we actually worked more. We worked more on a 6 and 7 day a week basis. And one of the best calls I think I've ever gotten in the transit industry was in a moment of crisis, where I get a call from the CEO of Schnucks begging us to continue to run service. So why did he do it? He did that because those essential workers, those folks who were stocking his shelves in a fundamental aspect of the food supply in a community like ours, was absolutely critical. And we're the folks who were moving St. Louis at this point. So really interesting, in a moment of crisis, we were able to impart what our value is. But still, that's a big challenge. So we have been tracking every single day what the effect of COVID is specifically on our workforce. And I'm just going to be very honest with you, it's been very tough. So I have an operator core closer to 1,600 operators. And of those 1,600, as of really yesterday, we had close to 95 positives associated with that group. That is very tough. And unfortunately, early in the program, when we were still figuring out the social distancing aspects, I'll never forget getting a call when we had one of our operators test positive in Brentwood. And then what we do is we pull our video resources and see all the associated, quarantines that we would have to. And on that night, we lost close to 22 people who then we had to quarantine for 2 weeks. Let me tell you, it's hard to run a system when you lose that many people. And we did. So now, as the arc of time has gone on and we've been able to essentially try to manage those positives more carefully, our quarantine number has gone down. But at one time, we had over 200 that we lost out of our workforce as a result of quarantines, or let's say if someone had some other health issues that they needed to stay home associated with it. So that was a huge challenge. We're dealing with it better now, but it's still a challenge today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Next question. We know that the pandemic has been devastating to transit riderships with these shutdowns and with cessation and only providing essential service. So now that we're out of phase one, as Scott called it, triage, and we are into phase two, what protocols have your agencies or organizations put in place to help bring riders back to your systems? And it could be protocols or programs, but what could other transit agencies learn from what you're doing to start to see the curve go up again with regards to transit ridership?
Mm-hmm.
Taulby, you want to go first and we'll go
Sure.
backwards this time?
All right, we'll go backwards. So kind of almost what my earlier comment was, we're going to do everything we can. And then you tell the public everything that you are doing. Okay. So for instance, actually since March 23rd, we are temperature screening 100% of our workforce before they come into work. So out in the parking lot. And that's one of those health integrity issues that we use with our workforce. That's good for our workforce, but then also a signal to our riding public. As you can see, I have my wristband today. What's interesting is no matter where I am, when I have this wristband, people are like, hey, what's that? And it's an integrity issue. It's an integrity about the health of our system, and people tend to feel better about that. So how do we then translate to our patrons? And that is, then we tell them that we are testing all of our employees. We're bringing our rolling stock in nightly for disinfectants. We're adding polycarbonate screenings where we can. We are asking them for 100% masks. So all of that menu of fundamental health integrity issues that make our system safer. I think the public can relate to that. and trying to get that message out when we can get to a full recovery. And I'm not sure when that date is. I wish I did. Is I think our best tactic right now.
Thank you. Jameson?
Sure. So we've done a lot of the same things other agencies are doing, right? Transparency, communication. We do have a med bus here on site every single day, checking temperatures. We have multiple outlets for healthcare services that we're communicating to our employees. I think it's going to be important to continue to talk about what's happening with the service and to continue to have the message that we put a safe service out on the street each day. The folks that are riding our service, it's not about the rides, it's about the outcome of the ride. So getting folks to jobs, getting folks to healthcare, getting folks to social, that's all really important. And they're not going to use it if the system doesn't work. So we've been pushing forward. It's not a secret. Kansas City it stays on edge on trying innovative things, and we've continued that. So we've social distanced our buses, but we've also partnered with a company called Swiftly that's going to allow people to see what capacity on the buses are, so they can see that from their mobile phone. We're looking at technology to help us with our docking with level boarding. We just got a name grant on that to help assist with that, to make sure that our level boarding platforms are docked, our buses are docked consistently each and every time, so that our riders that have disabilities, aren't hindered and can use the service. So we're going to continue to build off of a solid platform of solid delivery, making sure we're doing the things to keep our passengers and our riders safe, but also continue to push forward on those things that go into different ridership markets and allow people to access the service even better. One of our Ride KC members is actually looking at increasing their footprint of their microtransit service right now, rather than pulling back. So that's indicative of the approach that we're taking here. It's a good service. We're cleaning daily. We're disinfecting daily. We're going to communicate that. And by the way, we're going to communicate when we have confirmed cases as well. We're going to be open to the public, but also be able to continue to push forward as we have over the past few years.
Thank you, Jameson. And we're hearing that across the board, that transparency is key to getting back riders' confidence in your systems and gaining back riders. Scott, from the rural transit provider perspective, we know that you work with rural transit providers from across the country, including several here in Missouri, Oats Transit being the largest rural provider in the country. What are they doing? What protocols are they putting in place to help bring riders back to those systems?
Well, similar to my colleagues, dialogue, communication, critical, instituting all the safety protocols that you can manage and making sure the riding public knows it. Interestingly, for rural systems, we never saw ridership dip like we saw for a lot of big urbans. And I think in some ways that's indicative of the essential services that Taulby was talking about. There are less rural riders that can decide to telework. Now, interestingly, on the healthcare side, we are seeing telehealth replace some of those less critical healthcare trips. But from the get-go, you got to go to dialysis 3 times a week. So you can't choose to telework that. And so the way we kind of discussed with our rural operators what is essential, and it was workforce, it was healthcare trips, it was these kinds of things, get them to communicate those pieces. And then, the other piece that rural agencies, they looked at these numbers of the CARES Act and were in some ways flabbergasted, like, oh my God, this is 3 times my annual appropriation dropping in. And I heard from many of them, like, I won't ever be able to spend this. And I kind of said, well, keep that to yourself right now and wait and see, because there's a lot of things going on here. And, you know, I know that KCATA and Bi-State are dealing in the same issue. A lot of us have had trouble finding operators prior to COVID. And so that was another real goal we had, was use the CARES Act funds to put some of your drivers on administrative leave because they're over the age of 65, because they've got these other conditions, but so you don't lose them, so that as we start to move through these pieces, you don't end up hampered. The other issue that I think bears an emphasis here is this notion of social distancing and what that does to transit service. And the idea that, well, Oregon and New Jersey have both said we don't expect transit systems to follow a 6-foot social distance. Interesting. And well, why is that? Well, on a fixed route bus, so 6-foot social distance versus the 2-foot that they instituted in Oregon almost doubles the potential load of that bus. And if you're in a system that didn't lose 90% of your ridership, maybe you lost half, like some of those numbers Robbie was talking about in Kansas City, and now it's building back up. We've been concerned for our rural and our smaller members that they immediately run up against, I don't have enough fleet to be able to serve my community as it returns. And I've asked the FTA about this regularly at the federal level, and they kind of answer like, do what you think is appropriate, which always frightens me. Because that kind of, to me, sometimes makes me feel like, do what you think is appropriate and we will punish you for it later. But these are the tough decisions that rural operators, all of us are trying to manage right now.
Thank you. I so appreciate Scott's humor. You know, we're dealing with very, very difficult situations, but once in a while, a small laugh is good for people, you know, when you're dealing with such huge crises. And I do appreciate your optimism that you believe we'll be moving out of this with the vaccine in the first quarter of 2021. We all hope for the same, if not sooner. But what do you believe will be the lasting impacts to transit agencies from the pandemic? And what opportunities do you see arising from this health crisis? I thought it was interesting, Jameson, that you already brought up that KCATA is looking at hiring a consultant to look at potentially having a portion of your workforce continue to work from home and telecommute. So among the three of you, what do you think will be the lasting impacts, and what opportunities do you think will come out of this if you can see to the end of this tunnel that we're currently in?
So
who would like to go first?
I'll go first, but I just want to
Okay.
go on to what Scott said. You know, it's interesting that, you know, 6 feet on the bus, but that middle seat on an airplane is not 6 feet
Exactly.
long. You know, I'm a big guy. Those seats are small, man. So it's interesting how that's being looked at. But, you know, you mentioned what do we see coming out of this. And you're right. You know, we're looking at remote work as a strategy. But you know what? That's a relatively small thing. That's an internal thing, and it's a small thing. What I see coming out of this is the realization that, you know, transit plays a role. It plays a role in the bigger picture. So, you know, look at what's happening now when ridership goes down, and you see a lot more homeless, whether on the bus or not. You know, on corners, in front of shopping centers. It's now shining a light on a problem that, quite frankly, was always there. You know, whether you have a fare or you don't have a fare, no one is, you know, saying, I don't want to live in a house because the bus is free. The problem is always there. And transit can jump into that and work with other organizations to identify what services are needed. Taulby talked about, I think it was Taulby, maybe it was Scott, talked about transit agencies jumping in with meal delivery. You know, we've done some of that here, you know, and that's the power that we can affect within the community. Buses being used as mobile hotspots for kids that don't have access to Wi-Fi. You know, these are things that transit is being called on to do that typically we wouldn't think about, but we've always been here. We have always been a part of the community. We were an integral part of the civil rights movement. We are an integral part of helping build communities. We've always been right here. And you know, if we get that realization that we have so many touch points, think about a bus operator, how many touch points they have compared to a teacher, a police officer, or a fire department. Now, if your police officer is interacting with as many people a day as we have on one of our routes, there's probably a problem, or maybe it's a Super Bowl parade. I don't know, but you know that's the thing. We have more opportunity to touch people, and that's what I see coming out of this. I think transit's going to be looked at in a different way. All of the agencies that have fought through and reinvented themselves can jump into those gaps, are being viewed differently in their communities as problem solvers and heroes. And I think that as we move forward, as long as we stay transparent, keep our commitment to safety, I think we're in a whole new space. I really do.
Thank you, Jameson. Taulby, would you like to go next?
Sure. Well, Scott's comment on FTA reminds me of my dad when he used to look at me and say, "Let your conscience be your guide." I knew I was in trouble when that line came at me. So anyway, but all kidding aside, I think the biggest, so remember, we're just part, look, I like to think of this in the aspect of what is transit is just part of transportation. Okay. We're really not in, and we should be in conscious and in connected to other parts of transportation. We're not in conflict with cars. We're just part of the solution, right? So in that context, I like to think of our new role moving through is how are we the solution to the problems in our cities? So obviously COVID is a big deal and it's rocked us, it's hit us hard. But as I pointed out, it also helped us impart our value to the community in moving essential workers and so on. And in other, for instance, social problems that are obviously prescient right now in our cities, you know, where are we providing those solutions? Well, I would say, you know, in the problem of access and economic equality and equity, those issues that are just right there key, transit provides part of the solution. And I think what we need to be sure to lean into in trying to create better cities and regions and just better society is what is our role to fulfill that blank spot? First, see that blank spot, talk about it, discuss it, and figure out how we can accomplish that, and both in St. Louis and Kansas City and all throughout Missouri and so on.
Thank you, Taulby. Scott, do you want to take this one on?
Sure. The idea of change prior to COVID-19 was daunting. You know, we had the arrival in the last few years of TNCs. We have all this technology coming at us. We've got automated technologies that are out there and being tested. You know, change was already something that as a national organization, we were trying to get our members ready for. And then this puts the whole change notion on steroids, right? I mean, and so the idea is, how nimble are you? And how nimble are you as an organization to be able to find roles, effective roles in your community to serve, and to be able to put assets into those roles. And, you know, I found myself in March and April talking to a lot of our members about, hey, things that you were doing that you kind of viewed as not so productive or even unproductive prior to COVID-19 are going to be viewed in an even worse shape as we roll through this. And is this opportunity, has it arrived for you to look at different ways to do things? And to do that at a time where we also said, and on top of your normal appropriations, here's 3 years worth of funding at 100% to help backstop some of those ideas. Now, as of a week ago, 95% of the CARES Act funds have been spent on operating nationally, as they should be. But there is going to come a time when, and again, I'm an optimist, we are going to move into a period where we're going to want to refire the economy. And I think those funds left over for systems that haven't spent all their CARES Act funds are going to be looked at from FTA to say, hey, use them for capital now. That they were always available for capital. There's no restriction in the CARES Act for operating your capital, but the wise use has been capital. And then, you know, looking long term, and there's not a lot of this in Missouri, but if I was in the chair of running the Long Island Railroad, something that is completely dedicated to commuter service, and commuter service that is largely white collar in nature, I would be really concerned, because you've got these fixed assets, and we are seeing, and I'm reading all sorts of studies that are talking about right now, massive changes in telework. Major corporations in urban settings deciding, you know what, why are we spending all this money on infrastructure that the last 26 weeks have proven, in some cases, we don't need as much? And so part of what I've been trying to figure out with our membership is how to accentuate right now the essential nature of the service we've been providing and our members have been providing, rural, small cities have been providing throughout, so that we get to March of 2021, I want to be able to show that we've not only returned ridership, but what we've really learned is just what we've been hearing from my colleagues. Our values, the essential nature of our service has been affirmed, and not just in ways that make our hearts feel good, but here's numbers to show it. And as change arrives in public policy, it shouldn't mean that you are changing the way we've invested in and the way we are subsidizing these trips, because these trips are ongoing. It's going to, I think, long-term, create some really unusual circumstances in places where we have long seen transit, you know, the 5:15 train taking workers from Manhattan out to suburban Westchester County in Connecticut, that's been ubiquitous. This is gonna, I think we have to acknowledge this is gonna change some of that.
Thank you. Thank you. I do want to remind our audience, if they have questions, please put them in the chat box and we will get to them as quickly as possible. So we're 7 months into this global event, or 26 weeks, or however you want to look at it. But what message do you think needs to be pushed out about public transit, not only in the industry, but into the general broad-based public? What do they need to know? What is the message that needs to get out there about public transit right now?
Kim, there's only one answer to that. It's safe. That is the fundamental piece. It's safe, and it's there and has been all along to do the essential trips that we all do. I think that's the critical answer to that one.
Thank you.
So
Jameson,
I'll jump in.
Taulby.
How about we'll be ready when you're ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So that we're going to do everything that we can. And I realize that the world is going to change. I don't know how much though.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, how happy is everybody having a Zoom barbecue? Okay. I'm not happy with that. It's not the same. You know, look, I think all this remote, even this, although you did a great job with this conference, as opposed to actually meeting and doing something, this is miserable. It is not what I think, not whether, yes, can we do business this way? Yes. Do we want to do business this way? I don't think so. I don't think that's who we are as citizens and as regions. I think we're going to want to move to something else, and we got to be ready to provide that when that day comes.
You know,
I like what you said about Zoom. I'm going to cut you off 1 minute, Jameson, but I also think there is a little insight on these Zoom meetings. You get to see into people's actual worlds. Like Jameson has a lovely family behind him that we would never know how gorgeous they were until he sits in front of them on a Zoom call. So go ahead, Jameson.
all right, kid. You said be nice when we started this, so I'm going to keep up my end of the bargain here. No, I can't say any better than Scott or Taulby. I think that you know, it's safety, and that, you know, we're always going to be here. And you know, I really like the fact that, you know, transportation, and keep in mind, transit's not even in our name, in KCATA's name. The T stands for transportation. So transportation is always going to be that fill gap where, you know, if there's an issue where we can help be a part of the solution. And I think that those are the messages that we have to keep out in front of the public.
So we did have one comment so far. Cheryl O'Connor from Enterprise wants Taulby to know that you just stole Enterprise's tagline. And you'll hear it from their president tomorrow, that when we're ready, when you are ready. So well done, Taulby. Enterprise is very happy that you're pushing their tagline throughout the conference. So what is one final comment or lesson, while we wait to see if there's any other questions in the chat box, that you want people to remember from this workshop or this panel discussion that you think is really important that gets out there? You know, from our perspective as an association, we have been meeting weekly, if not more, with our providers and trying to help them share lessons learned and protocols that worked and haven't worked, and just give them the opportunity to talk about what's going on at their agencies or with their riders or with their operators. And kudos to all of you and all of the providers that are on this workshop right now. This has been a struggle from the very beginning, and no one was 100% prepared for this, but I would say that we've come a long way in the last 7 months. What do you want to make sure that people know from you, whether it's KCATA or Bi-State Development or CTAA representing rural transit providers? What is the one thing you want people to walk away from this workshop knowing?
You're more resilient than you think you are. You're more flexible than you think you can be. You know, the industry as a whole has done, I think, an outstanding job of being flexible, changing service levels, putting in procedures. I mean, we wrote policy after policy after policy. That was all March was about, in making sure that people were safe. And, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but our executive team is brand new. Kicked off in December and jumped right into this. So we, you know, as a microcosm of the industry, we've been able to turn some things. You know, some things could have been turned faster, but, you know, we're a bigger ship, so sometimes you can't quite turn as fast as you want. But, you know, I think that a lot of the heroes that maybe we didn't see or notice, we're starting to see people, you know, personnel who have stepped up and made, you know, big differences and big changes in how they work, and have run towards the fire and not away from it. And I think those are the things that we have within each of our organizations. I know Taulby's organization is bigger than ours, so he's probably seen more of it. But, you know, I think that when we get into a situation where we have to adapt quickly, we get to see what we're made of. We get to see the DNA. And, you know, everybody has that, and everyone's doing so well. And I think you just can't lose sight of that moving forward, that you can do more than you think you can.
Excellent.
So I'll jump
Scott
in.
or Taulby?
How about,
Okay.
let's just make a difference, right? Make a difference like this young lady. You know, we're going through a little bit of strategic plan right now. how are we making a difference? You're making a difference one person at a time. And we can do that within our communities. We can react. We can provide solutions. I think that's what we're trying to do, even in the face of crisis. Make a difference. Do the small things that you need to do, one person at a time, even with 2,400 employees. How do we move it forward? We do it one person at a time. And we do it with those operators, those frontline employees who are out there. Look, they're the heroes there who show up for that 4 a.m. shift in the middle of COVID and do it anyway. They're the heroes. So look, we're supporting those. That's my job, is to support those folks, and I'm going to continue to do so.
Great.
Well, Kim, I'm gonna use a similar analogy, or at least I'm gonna pull from a similar source that Taulby did earlier. My father used to tell me, he said, hope in one hand and spit in the other, and see which one fills up quicker. And my point being, this should have taught us we've got to be, Taulby's talking about strategic planning, adaptive strategies. How can we build that kind of resilience that we've all onboarded here in the last 26 weeks? How do we make this permanent and part of our DNA? Celebrate what we've done, but also understand that this has been a fire unlike one that we ever expected. But you've learned some things about your organization. You've learned some things about your system, maybe that you didn't do as well. And how do you take those lessons and weave them back into where you're headed in the future? And hoping that this goes away, hoping that this never happens again. That's great, but I really prefer plans, systems that are set up to handle ideas. And then from a leadership perspective, we've urged our managers, people running these systems, to use this time to get hands-on. Go out and interact with your operators, interact with your customers safely, obviously, and build that kind of credibility, because Taulby's right. The whole point of what we all do is a trip. It's not all the policies. It's not all the stuff that goes on Capitol Hill or in the state capitol in Missouri. It's the trip. And the more we think our leadership at Systems can be connected to that trip and remember that's what we're here to do, the better.
So I love all this fatherly wisdom too. My dad always said, when you're sliding down the banister of life, you're going to get a splinter or two, and some may be 2x4s. So, I think maybe COVID has been a 2x4 for the transit industry, but the positivity and the resilience and the flexibility that you've all talked about today and demonstrated, I think provides hope for transit agencies, whether you're small or large, that we can get through this and actually learn from this and have new protocols in place. I want to thank you all for your time today. I really appreciate all the lessons learned that you've shared and the commentary that you've provided around what to many seems like an obstacle they may not be able to overcome. And I think that you've done a really good job laying out that. We don't have any more questions right now, so I want to thank you for your time. And as I said in the last workshop, if there were an audience, I know that there would be roaring applause for your answers. So thank you very much. And our next panel will start at 11:30. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.